The New York Giants have started their search for their next head coach. I'm John Schmelk, joined by Paul Dottino. And Paul, Joe Schoen has interviewed somebody that he's very familiar with. He's coming from the Buffalo Bills, their defensive coordinator, longtime coach Leslie Frazier, a defensive coordinator as far back as 2003, also a 3-year head coach for the Vikings. He has a ton of experience.
Well, he does, John. You're talking about a guy who's 62 years old. He is a football lifer. And when you say a ton of experience, you're really not fooling at all because he's done it at every level. Remember, he was a quarterback on the 1985 Chicago Bears team, the Monsters in the Midway, that won a Super Bowl championship for Mike Ditka, one of the great defenses that ever played the game. And since that time, Frazier moved into the coaching ranks, and he's known as having a pressure defense, likes to run a 4-3, and always gets after you. But think about it. He's been with so many different organizations, whether it be Philadelphia or Cincinnati or Indianapolis or Minnesota or even Tampa before spending the last 5 years with the Buffalo Bills. So he's had a wide variety of experiences as a defensive backs coach, obviously as a player we talked about, as a head coach, 3.5 years with the Minnesota Vikings, remember, when they went to the NFC Championship game in 2009. He was the defensive coordinator on that team. The guy's got a lot of pelts on his belt, as Parcells used to say.
Yeah, and he's coming over from the Buffalo Bills, Paul, where he's not only their defensive coordinator, also their assistant head coach. He arrived there with Sean McDermott. Obviously, he's very familiar with where he came from. And, Sean McDermott is from that Steve Spagnuolo defensive school. You mentioned the pressure stuff. And this year, the Buffalo Bills have the number one defense in football. And you look at some of the metrics, especially the yards per play metric, Paul, is really not close in terms of the amount of yardage they've allowed per play this year. Now, they haven't had the toughest schedule in terms of the quarterbacks they've played, but the results have been fantastic.
Yeah, well, they're a tough, rugged, hard-hitting defense, and they specialize in trying to get physical up front. And that's no surprise, because if you're going to play a pressure defense, you better be able to have a really good, stout front seven. And think about this, too. Some of the coaches that he has coached with, right? Andy Reid, Marvin Lewis, Tony Dungy. I mean, these are some big names throughout his career where he was assisting before he finally got that one opportunity as a head coach with the Vikings.
And you mentioned he was the interim head coach for half a year. Then he was the full-time head coach for 3 years after that. And one other thing on the Bills defense this year, Paul, they've done it without maybe their best defensive player, Tre'Davious White, who got hurt earlier in the year, but they managed to survive his loss, which is a credit to a defensive coordinator that's able to make adjustments.
Well, remember, to be honest with you, John, this is a team who, even though they have Josh Allen at quarterback, they don't have a really explosive or a dynamic running game, right? So they went out and got Diggs to make sure that he could help out Josh Allen in the passing game, but they pretty much knew that their bread and butter was going to be rely on the defense. So that puts a lot of pressure on the coordinator. That tells Leslie Frazier, look, we know we can do some things with our quarterback. We know we can hit some big plays with Diggs, but ultimately we know we're a defense-first team. And after all, look where they play, upstate New York. It's cold. It's nasty. You get into the playoffs, you better have a saber-toothed defense.
Leslie Frazier, one of the candidates for the Giants head coach position. We'll cover all of it and more. Stay tuned to Giants.com, the Giants mobile app, and, of course, all the Giants social media platforms.